Hi and welcome to Westeros.org's YouTube channel. Today we're going to be doing a follow-up video to the last episode, Eastwatch. I promised in my review of that episode that we would look more closely and that I would have Elio along for the purpose at the big revelation at the end of the episode where Gilly apparently finds a document, a diary from a High Septon that indicates that Rhaegar annulled his marriage to Elia and was remarried to Lyanna. We have a lot of problems with this idea. Obviously, that's what they're going with on the show, but the likelihood of this being anything of what George is planning for the books, we don't think that is particularly plausible for the world building that has been established when it comes to annulments and how they work in Westeros, and also a lot of the plot logistics around a decision like this. And finally, I'm going to give some thoughts on what it is I think that they're doing with this. Why are they making this decision, which probably very likely is contrary to what will be happening in the books.
So annulment in Westeros. What is an annulment and how does it differ from a divorce? Here we have to look to our world and our history. A divorce is a more modern concept. It's the idea, or at least in the West, a more modern concept where you basically say we're ex-husband and wife. But for a long period in the Middle Ages, in Western Europe in particular, where the Catholic Church was strongest, you couldn't divorce. The idea was that the bond of marriage was sacrosanct. It could not be broken. The only thing you could do is say, this marriage was invalid. It was never actually sanctified by God, and so it never existed. And that is an annulment. So basically, when you annul a marriage, husband and wife are no longer husband and wife. They never were husband and wife in the eyes of God, and of the church. This does lead to complications of children, and people have raised this, arguing with Linda. It's a very complicated picture, the idea of what happens to children in a marriage thanks to an annulment. You have to look at the fact that the Middle Ages is a very broad period of time. You're looking from after the fall of the Roman Empire into, Battle of Bosworth Field is one period I'll use. I think I would say Caxton's edition of Mort d'Arthur. That's another.
Not to mention,
different areas,
different countries having different interpretations. So it's not that straightforward that you can say that in the Middle Ages, if you had an annulment, the children remained legitimate or the children became bastards. There are examples of both.
And in particular, there is a change between the early Middle Ages where legitimacy didn't really matter that much. When marriages were annulled, the children were just it was just assumed that they'd still be legitimate because the idea was, the marriage was in good faith, and the sins of the father should not be visited on the innocents. So you have, for example, William the Bastard, who inherited Normandy and went on to conquer England,
despite apparently being a bastard.
Yes, but if you look later on, by the end of by the 13th century, you started seeing more and more examples where, in fact, the opposite started to happen. Legitimacy started to matter a lot more, and you started to have people. If they were annulling a marriage, they explicitly asked, and by the way, please make sure that our children are all still considered legitimate. Or you started to get cases, especially later on in England when they started moving away from a church and so on, or the Catholic Church in Rome. You started to have more and more examples of situations where marriages were annulled and the children of those marriages were considered illegitimate. Famously, Henry VIII's daughter, Mary. Another example, a good one, is actually Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville's marriage being annulled and those children being rendered bastards. It's very complicated, but the important thing is, and one of the points I found when I was researching this is the common law. The common law of England started to differentiate itself from the canon law, the law of a church. And it has one of the King's Sergeant at Arms in the 1400s, 1490 something, remarked. This is a rough paraphrase, but there are many men today who by common law are bastards, but by the canon law are legitimate.
It seems to be somewhat motivated by various inheritance disputes, for example.
That was the major factor.
If you could basically say, aha, so-and-so is a bastard, then I can grab their land and so on. So lawyers got into the mix, basically, and
pretty much.
Complicated.
One of the examples I found was just like one of the first cases in which basically an annulment led to someone losing their inheritance was a Mabel of something in like late 12th century.
Yeah.
And for the first time ever that they could find a clear example, she lost out on her rights because it was determined that the annulment of the marriage of her parents led to her being illegitimate.
Yeah.
So you have a lot, but the common law bit is really interesting because there's a couple of factors. So basically, as the Middle Ages progressed, legitimacy started to matter more, and illegitimacy, people really paid attention to it. Well, what do we have in Westeros? People pay a lot of attention to legitimacy and illegitimacy, to the point where George goes above and beyond. You have the bastard names, which is like really like letting everyone know this is a bastard child of some nobleman. And then there's a common law aspect. Recently, actually very funnily enough, in St. Petersburg, George was asked about the law system. And he said, well, he's opposed, but the English common law was kind of what he imagined, and to some degree, the way it formed and the way it worked. Well, as we have that example in the late Middle Ages, when people started caring about legitimacy a lot, the common law cared about it a lot, and it was starting to be very restrictive as to who was legitimate. And that if you were, let's say your parents had you, and then they got married, by the common law, you were a bastard. And if your parents got their marriage annulled, you were also rendered illegitimate in many cases.
We do have an example, of course, from the World of Ice and Fire, where children who were produced prior to a marriage were rendered legitimate by the marriage.
When the marriage was allowed, yes.
Yes. But it could also be a situation where George has decided that, okay, if you can retroactively legitimize children by a marriage, you can also retroactively delegitimize them if the marriage is undone. So we don't know for sure what the stance is in Westeros, but we do know that legitimacy matters a lot. And so it is possible. I mean, I'd have to say that it's maybe like 50-50 on whether an annulment of Rhaegar's marriage to Elia would render the children illegitimate. And there's always the possibility of, well, if he could get an annulment, then he could probably also get somebody to say that the children should remain legitimate. That's not mentioned, oddly enough, in this supposed High Septon's diary. You would think that Rhaegar would have cared about this, at least, if he feels it's necessary for some reason to break the marriage.
What are the grounds for it?
Yes, I mean, that's the other problem.
There's a very restrictive list of grounds in the Middle Ages for what an annulment is. Now, George has discussed annulment in Westeros. One of the things you need to do is you need to, one or both parties have to be party to it. No one else can ask for a marriage to be dissolved. So you have a lot of examples in the World of Fire, for example, where various kings were telling various unruly kinsmen, put aside this wife that you took but you shouldn't have, but they can't actually force it through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have, I mean, at certain point in time, the High Septon is 100% in the pocket of the king, and they could, but no, like, if they don't agree to it to some degree, then it's not going to happen.
And we don't know either whether both people have to agree, because if both people would have to agree, then Elia would also have to agree.
I think it's enough for one at least to put it forward, but I think it would be a lot easier to have it happen if both agreed.
Yes, especially when you're trying to do it without the regular reasons available to you. The common reason, the only clear example we have
non-consummation.
Is non-consummation.
Baelor the Blessed had the High Septon put aside his marriage to his sister Diana because they had not consummated. People wanted King Aerys I to put aside his wife, thinking that maybe he wasn't sleeping with her because he didn't like her, and maybe he preferred someone else, but he just wasn't interested.
And we have Tywin being concerned about Tyrion not consummating the marriage with Sansa, because then the marriage can be set aside. So it seems clear enough that non-consummation is a valid reason. All sorts of other arguments have been brought forward. I've been talking to people on Twitter and on YouTube. Could Rhaegar get Elia put aside because of the risk to her life in being bearing more children essentially would render her barren. She's not barren, but it's a risk to her life.
I find that one really difficult.
It's difficult. He has 2 children. He's not lacking in heir.
I mean, surely the idea would be, well, that's the number of children the gods have allotted to this marriage. That's it. There's no. That's my view.
Yeah.
Now, Westeros is a place where, again, the High Septon is weak, the crown is strong, law is flexible.
I mean, certainly we already see that it is the king who tends to legitimize bastards.
Yeah, we don't really see that.
It goes through the king. So, yes, it's not impossible to get an annulment, although the other common reason is non-consummation is a big one. The other one is, making it an illegitimate marriage. But, in Westeros, I am not sure that the excuse of consanguinity is going to fly when you're a Targaryen. No. We were talking about that the other day, and I said that, well, maybe he could argue lack of consanguinity, that he and Elio weren't related enough.
Yeah, for a Targaryen, that might make sense.
Basically, the only thing I can think of, because, yeah, if you're regularly marrying your sister, the argument about, oh, we're too closely related for the church, not gonna fly. You kind of beat that one into the church.
Yeah, so it seems very unlikely that the next segment, those sort of the things around it from. So when she told me about it, I was like, I mean, but what about but what about? And I realized, well,
yes, it doesn't seem like they thought this through, because picture this. First of all, this appears to be an act done in some sort of secrecy. It's certainly not announced, although for some reason this High Septon, who shouldn't have a name, by the way, he should not be writing diaries.
Has a name?
Yes, Septon Maynard.
I mean, it's the High Septon in the reign of so and so, the second High Septon.
He forgot to misplace his name.
Oh.
And he writes in his diary, and he writes about undoing this marriage and remarrying Rhaegar. If it's supposed to be secret, couldn't they have told him not to write a diary about it? And then, if it is supposed to be secret,
why is it supposed to be secret at all?
What does it matter if you have a secret annulment and a secret marriage? What does that do? Okay, let's say he wanted to keep it secret until after the war.
I mean, a secret marriage happens. I mean, Aemon V's son Jaehaerys and his daughter Shaira elope and have a secret marriage, and they consummate the marriage. And basically, once he learns that it's consummated, he can't do anything about it. He didn't want them to marry. Yeah. He had arranged betrothals. It caused a lot of trouble for him, but they decided to marry one another.
But presumably, the idea must be that both the annulment and the marriage was going to be announced once Rhaegar had won the war. He certainly, let's say that he just announces the marriage after the war. That makes no sense.
Like, why not just announce, like, look, we've tried to make this right. We got married instead.
Yes, exactly. That would be enough. I mean, I should know that neither of us doubt the idea that Rhaegar may have married Lyanna in some ceremony or other, in addition to Elio. Because there is evidence of Targaryens having multiple wives.
Yeah, it's something. Now, there we have 2 clear-cut examples, Aegon and his sisters. We don't know exactly the manner of it, if it was done via the faith or Valyrian ceremonies. Then we have Maegor getting married, and at least his second wife, he married in a Valyrian thing. And then they stopped. But I mean, they stopped because the faith got really angry about these things. But the faith was also very angry about the incest, and like...
They didn't stop with that.
They didn't stop with that.
No.
You even have a joking half... where Aegon, the Unworthy, has Mary Meg, and he gets married to her with a drunken mummer playing the part of a septon. I don't think that would be considered a legitimate marriage. No. But it's
certainly entirely possible that Rhaegar decided, in the situation that he's in, that we'll go ahead and I'll take a second wife. Elio can't have more children, but, in the books at least, the dragon has 3 heads, and he thinks that the other 2 children are those heads. He's not gonna throw them out.
No.
He needs an additional child, and then he'll have to have an additional wife. And I think that it's entirely possible that they could have either done it with a septon, or they could have just done it
a weirwood, or they could have done it in a Valyrian style.
I mean, let's not get into the complications of annulments and divorces or whatever when it comes to weirwood or old god marriages.
I think in the north it's like you just say you're no longer my wife, you're no longer my husband, before witnesses, and that's probably probably enough.
But anyway, he didn't have to. I don't see the point of the annulment as that they just cause problems for them, because I'm trying to imagine the situation where if he insisted that for some reason Rhaegar had to have an annulment, right? And then after the war, when he announces his marriage to Lyanna, because he has to do that if he's going to have his child by her be seen as legitimate. And then he's also going to announce his annulment to Elio, because why else have it? Okay, the Starks will be a little less pissed off at him. Ned will probably accept that after a while. If Ned survived, Ned will probably say, oh, fine, whatever, sort it out.
People are going to like, you dundering idiot. Why this huge mess over...
Yeah, mind you that you could still say that to Rhaegar in the books, so that's not a difference.
Sure.
But then you have the Dornish that just helped him win the war. I'd like to, imagine when he sends a little message off to Dorne, maybe, via the Kingsguard if Luwin survived, and nice working with you during the war, Luwin. Thanks for the 10,000 spears. By the way, I've annulled my marriage to your niece. Her children may or may not be bastards. Oh, and, say hi to her brother Oberyn while you're at it. I hope he's not too pissed off at me. No hard feelings, right?
Yeah,
I can't imagine it. So it's bizarre that they went this route when I don't see it as necessary. I think they just needed to have a note in there about a secret marriage to Lyanna. That was all there needed to be.
Yeah, yes, it would work. I mean, you've obviously come across a different idea for why they've done it.
Yes.
Let's make that a distinct segment.
Yes, we'll make that so we can blather on a little more. So why did they come up with this splendid idea? Well, in the books, we have a plot line that is missing from the show. Well, we have a lot of plot lines that are missing from the show, but one in particular in the later stages is the element of Aegon coming over with the Golden Company and putting forward his claim, which is, in fact, superior to Daenerys'. If he truly is Rhaegar's son, we don't believe it, but that is going to be the way, presume, that he puts forward his claim, that it is actually superior to Daenerys. The child of a goes before an aunt.
The brother's children would go, so Rhaegar's children would have gone before Daenerys. And I mean, technically speaking, the Dance with Dragons kind of settled the question of whether a woman could sit the throne, and that's another issue entirely, but basically, Dany's claim really works as if she is the only remaining Targaryen. Otherwise, old law would suggest, well, any other Targaryen, so long as they have a penis, is acceptable. And frankly, even a bastard Targaryen, even if the situation with Lyanna and Rhaegar and Jon is they didn't marry, but he's illegitimate, even that would perhaps, there would be those who would say, well, that's better. That's closer to being legitimate than Dany.
Yeah, so we're okay with crazy people as long as they have a penis, basically.
On the throne, yes.
Yes, crazy people on the throne need to have a penis.
I mean, you also obviously had the Great Council in the reign of, after Maekar's death, trying to sort out the situation. And you did have a daughter of Daeron Verdrunken, who was very briefly considered, but very quickly
So, I mean, it's not like ironclad, they may consider it, but that is when you're really looking and you're having a hard time finding someone. Frankly, they might even have just started looking at Maester Aemon. I don't know.
They probably would be willing, or I mean, they'd start looking. I mean, you go back for family trees. I'm sure you can find some people who,
if they absolutely
from the high towers, maybe.
Yeah. But anyway, what the situation what we're gonna have in the books is that there's a rival claimant who says he has a better claim than Daenerys. I think that they wanted this effect on the show. I think they wanted the idea of Jon having not just a potentially stronger claim, but sort of with the whole issue of, well, if it's not a legitimate marriage, then he's a bastard. Even if Rhaegar and Elia married in some kind of... Rhaegar and Lyanna did marry in addition to Rhaegar and Elia, then there would be people who'd cast doubts on the legitimacy of it.
I mean, any more so? I mean, we have no settled law in Westeros saying Targaryens will not have polygamous marriages. It just kind of fell out of fashion.
True,
with Maegor.
true.
I don't recall.
But for some reason, they seem to felt that it would be clearer if Jon is like the one true child.
Isn't it more of a case also that perhaps they really haven't had time to establish on the show much about the polygamy in the past, and that there is precedent? I mean, we've got Aegon and his sisters.
We've had mentioned Aegon.
Maegor, I don't think has been. I don't know.
No, I don't think Maegor and his multiple wives have gotten much attention. There's probably
had up to 3 or 4 at the same time at one point.
Yeah. So yes, they may not want the confusion of what Rhaegar was married to 2 women. Is that really possible? That they want clearly everyone to see that Jon's claim is superior.
Without question. I mean,
without question, without any complications, without having to introduce additional material around it. They want it to look like he's...
And without looking at all as to, like, worrying about the effect it would have had in the past. Like,
no.
Whether it made any sense, whether it had worked, whether they're
looking at specifically, as with so much these last seasons, they are looking for a particular effect. Probably for some particular scenes between Jon and Dany, no doubt, where this gets all dramatic and people have to decide who they're going to support and whatever. So they wanted that effect. Being inspired, no doubt, by the presence of Aegon. I don't know that they know everything that's going to happen with Aegon's claim. I think they just know that there is that idea of introducing another claimant. And Jon's obviously going to be that one. And they want to bolster it a bit more. And they didn't think through the consequences of what actually, like, could Rhaegar get an annulment? What would happen if he got an annulment? All these fallouts, they're just thinking that the history is a done deal. He didn't survive. It doesn't matter. We don't have to think too much about it. We just have Gilly conveniently coming across yet another piece of information randomly in some book. It's amazing with all the books that there are in the Citadel that somehow she stumbles across the useful information all the time. And no doubt, the stuff that Sam made away with is also going to all be completely relevant material. But yeah, I already did my bitching about Eastwatch. I could probably continue to do so for a long while, but this was sort of our thoughts on the plausibility of the scenario with the annulment. And in short, no, we think it's a really, really terrible idea. Yes, Rhaegar probably married Lyanna, but no, he... Or 50-50.
I don't think it's necessary. Like, some people want to use, the Kingsguard wouldn't be at the Tower of Joy if Jon wasn't legitimate. And that's not, that's absolutely wrong. George has said explicitly one of her duties is to obey. And at that time, if Rhaegar had given them a command, they would do that command until they got something countermanding it. If he told them to guard a tree stump, they would guard a tree stump.
We had Kingsguard going along with Aegon the Unworthy to his meetings with Mary Meg, his mistress.
Well, Kingsguard stole Mary Meg from her husband.
Too, yes. So they did what he said. He wasn't, and he was in a lot weaker position in terms of inheritance.
Yeah, Rhaegar was a crown prince.
With a fairly dodgy king on the throne. So, no, the Kingsguard are going to listen to what the royal family says. Technically, they're only supposed to listen directly to the king, but if the king has said, listen to my son, they're going to listen to
And this clear impression, suggestion is that was the case that Aerys had, before he went completely nutty, had told them, even before, but it was okay to follow. Alternatively, what we're going to discover is that it wasn't technically, but they preferred to follow his commands because, Aerys being crazy. Yeah.
So yeah, no, this was another not so clever invention by the show, basically.
Yeah, I guess.
And I had to drag poor Elio into it.
Thank you.
You see, he even got sick from it. He's now all sniffly.
No, this is the con crud that happens after being in a convention center with thousands of people and airplanes and airports.
Are you sure it's not exposure to Game of Thrones?
Yeah, could be. Can't rule it out.
Yeah. Next video, by the way, will be talking about the World Con.
Hopefully, if I'm alive and kicking.
Until then.